Hello and welcome to Dialogue. Recently, major cities in China have further lifted curbs on buying homes, introducing policies to optimize and adjust the real estate market. Provincial capitals, including Hangzhou and Xi'an, have successively announced the comprehensive lifting of housing purchase restrictions. Policies in Tier 1 cities like Beijing and Shenzhen have also been relaxed. How should we view these moves? What other parallel measures are worth paying attention to? And what is the future of China's property market? Join us for our discussion from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Dr. Shao Yu, Director of Shanghai Finance and Development Laboratory, Warwick Powell, the adjunct professor at the Queensland University of Technology and the chairman of Smart Trade Networks, Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer at Novem Arcae Technologies, and David Mahon, Executive Chairman of Mahon China Investment Management. Welcome. Well, Jiahe, I will start with you. As we said, Hangzhou and Xi'an have announced the complete lifting of purchase restrictions in these two cities, at least right now. Before that, actually, some other cities in Chengdu, Changsha and Suzhou, for example, had already lifted their own restrictions. So what do you make of these moves? What is the consideration behind the policies?
Well, basically, they are removing these restrictions because we're having a slowdown with the real estate market, especially if you look at the Tier 2 cities that we're talking about here. I mean, the Tier 1 cities, including like Beijing, Shanghai, and Shenzhen, where you have a serious amount of population growth in the past many years, although this growth has been slowing down. And if you look at Tier 2 cities such as Nanjing, Hangzhou, and Xi'an, they are having a slower population inflow compared with the first-tier cities. Therefore, their property market is actually undertaking more pressure compared with the first-tier cities. So they lead the step of removing all the restrictions and welcoming everyone to come in and buy the properties there. And some of them even give more conditions. For example, if you buy the property there, you get a smaller amount of down payment, a lower interest rate. Also, some cities like, I think Nanjing said that if you buy a property there, you can apply for your hukou in the city as long as you just buy the house. So all these measures has been taken in order to help the local property markets.
Well, Dr. Shao Yu, if you look at the measures, basically if you buy, if you make the investment, and also there are additional interests, additional benefits, for example, hukou or household registration, a local residency in Hangzhou or Nanjing. So basically the government is trying to encourage investment in the property market.
Yeah, sure. I think another is just the government wants people to buy more houses because they want to soft landing of the real economy. And you can notice there is still another trend that move more people into the metropolitan area. So they encourage these people to have hukou for example, you mentioned the Nanjing and the Hangzhou. And the other thing is, I think the government just provide more leverage to normal people, which means they can borrow more money on the banking system. So this will support them to buy a bigger and good house for themselves. So I think it's okay. It will help a lot. Yeah.
David, if you look at these policies, I mean, in particular, to encourage people basically to flow into their own cities like Hangzhou, like Nanjing, I think that's people would say probably that's a smart move. Long term, not only about the property market, you do need a growing population to support your economic growth, isn't it?
I think that's true, and you're attracting middle-class people to your city, which of course grows the middle class of Hangzhou or Shenzhen. That's always positive. But I don't actually think these measures are going to make a big difference at this stage, because if you look at the first response in Hangzhou, landlords began to sell property pretty swiftly. And so there was more property on the market and prices went further down. So I don't think these measures are going to resolve the short-term issues. The Chinese government doesn't want the property sector to recover and become the main engine of the economy again. I think currently it's about 30% of GDP, whereas technology and manufacturing is 40%. And I think there is a gradual move away from property. So while these measures will do some things for some of these cities, this is not to recover the property sector. I think it's to stabilize it and make it a more ordinary and perhaps less constrained market. But they don't want it to be what it was before, which was a risk to the economy. So we shouldn't expect too much from these measures. I think the underlying thing is consumer confidence, which is recovering, and it has really recovered in the last few months. It needs to recover more before property prices lift again in these, especially these crucial cities, these first-tier cities, and the good second-tier cities like Hangzhou.
Yeah, good points. I want to go back to Shao Yu and Jiahe here. Obviously, these measures, on the surface, it's encouraging. But what about the effects, and also what is the, long-term purpose? Probably, are we encouraging the growth of a property market, or are we simply trying to recover the growth of the market here? Jiahe, start with you here.
Okay, when you look at these measures, they're actually, lifting the restrictions, which for free markets, these restrictions actually shall not be there. It's not supposed to be saying this, okay, you can buy the property, you can't. This is not what the market really is. So what the market really is that people, as long as they want to buy the property, they can just buy as they like. So these limits were actually put there when the property price was soaring too much that the government can't take it. And the government said, okay, the property is going to be like 80 times of the annual rent. That's too much the price that we had in the past. We had a property bubble. So the government put these limits onto the property market. But when this market is now cooling down again, it is the time to remove all the limits. I mean, everything, actually you can buy almost everything in China without limits. I mean, I can have like, if I want it, I can have 10 air conditioner on my wall, and that's allowed. If I wanted, I can buy 5 cars. There is no limit. I can buy like 20 mobile phone, which I don't need. But I can buy them if I really want them. So there should actually be no limits on the property market when we are talking about the market. So these limits, it is the time to remove all these limits right now. And it is also that when we look at the property market, it's not growing too well right now. The price are coming down. The trading value is actually coming down. So it is the time to lift these limits. But regarding how large this impact will be, that's a question. Because if you look at the property price in many of these cities, what we call the rental yield is still pretty low. The rental yield is usually annual rent to divide the house price. Usually, if we want there to be somewhere around 3% to 4%, but currently the rental yield in many cities like Xi'an, Nanjing, and Hangzhou are still around or even lower than 2%. That's too low a number. So that means it's better for you to rent a house rather than buy a house. So how this impact will be, we're not really too sure about that.
So, Shao Yu, so these measures themselves are, let's say, important, at least symbolically, because they are restricting, they are taking off these restrictions. But it's not really about, how far they will go to recover the market. And that's probably not sure. And it takes time to look at the effects.
Yeah, sure. Because I agree with both of the guests' point of view. For example, in China, you buy a house, you take a lot of measure to buy a house, probably. So just to remove all the restrictions on the buying side, it's okay. But the key point is the demand. It's all about demand. People without this kind of restriction, they still decide to buy a big house, buy an expensive house. It's really it's nowadays the big problem. It's a big decision for the whole family. So I think maybe release all the restriction is a necessary condition, but maybe not sufficient enough for the normal people to make the decision to buy a house. So another thing is, yes, I think the government just want to stabilize the whole market. It's not to make another kind of booming. Yes, it's kind of the process of the transformation. So we'll suffer a lot because of the transformation, but we have faced it.
Well, Warwick here, picking up of what David earlier said about this, the whole, the prospect of the economy or the plan for the economy here. Chinese economy is moving, let's say, away from the property market to rely more on this high-tech investment, high-tech growth. So that's the long-term plan here. But still, you need a balance probably, and you don't want to have a property market that is dragging the feet of the growth right?
Yeah, look, I think it's worthwhile just putting a little bit of historical context around all of this, as well as a little bit of a policy context. Historically, we saw coming into 2018 or thereabouts, significant leverage in the housing sector, which led to concerns from the People's Bank of China expressing that there was worries that China was potentially on the cusp of its own Minsky moment, which was a credit crisis. And consequently, at about the same time as well, President Xi Jinping talked about housing as being something for living in, not for something for speculating on. Now, the transformation that has been exercised since then through public policy levers has been to take the heat out of the property market, some deleveraging, and also transform the total structure of the capital investments within the economy as a whole. And we've seen that happen now with dramatic growth in lending to the high-tech sector, whilst at the same time the lending to the property sector has declined. That's the sort of big picture macroeconomic context. The other point to bear in mind is a geographical one, and this goes to questions of common prosperity, as well as creating opportunities for economic development to be spread more evenly across the country. China is a very, very big country, and many parts of the country still have a lot of infrastructure and room for development to take place. The initiatives that have been implemented so far is tied not only to the big picture, the macro picture, but it's also tied to an initiative to spread the economic development across the city as a whole, across the country as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, we are not sure yet about the impact or the effects of those policies, lifting the current restrictions. But of course, the gesture is symbolically important. That's probably meaning the end or the end of the ending of these restrictions over there. But of course, long term, there are more challenges to deal with. Probably more policies are expected to really help recover the property market there?
Yes, I think so. And I think to Jiahe's point, it's long overdue to take restrictions off many cities, on the one hand. On the other hand, I think one of the policy initiatives needs to be in creating alternative investment options. Because if there is an issue, it's not that, there is demand for housing, definitely still, and people are looking to be accommodated in a way that's affordable. But on the other hand, there's a lot of speculation, and that's something which isn't necessarily healthy if it's too much of the driver of the economy. So the government's still going to have to deal with this as an issue going forward, because there is a recovery of consumer confidence. It's gradual, but it's steady. And once people feel that the property market in their particular area has bottomed out, they will start buying again. And we're going to face property inflation again in certain cities, some of the more prosperous second-tier cities for sure. So they've still got an issue ahead of them. And I think one of the problems has been this fact that there aren't many alternatives for the middle class to invest their money. And if you now look at the stock market, which is, since it was initiated in, 1991, it really hasn't fulfilled its function in drawing money off more speculative investments and irrigating industry through the way that capital markets serve any economy. So I think one of the things the government could do is give some strong signals that steady, sensible policies around capital markets are going to be forthcoming in the next 1 to 2 years. And then perhaps money will move more into capital markets. Also, perhaps a larger private banking sector. So there's other instruments for people to consider. Then you get a more balanced deployment of household capital. Right now, really investors have very little choice but to invest in property. Mm-hmm. So it's a real mix. And I think the last point is you've got a patchwork across China. There isn't one property market. We need to talk about the Zhejiang market, the top 3 tiers, the first tier cities, Shenzhen, Beijing, Shanghai. They all differ from each other hugely.
Jiahe, of course, and also you do see different, maybe slightly different policies. There are, for example, more than 50 cities introducing this policy of trading the old and for the new policy, basically encouraging the household to sell their old houses so they can purchase a new one with the involvement of state-owned enterprises or state-owned acquisition capital here. So how does that work? Can it achieve its purpose by encouraging more people, or will that help give people more confidence in terms of investing?
Well, if you look at the actions of China's government in many economic sectors, not only the property, but also including like home appliances, automobiles, we have started many programs that sell your old stuff and we buy a new one and we'll give you a subsidy. So this is a policy that the Chinese government is actually taking, not only in the property market, but of course in the property market, but also like air conditioner, all these kind of things. Because that's a very easy way for the government to do compared with just a given subsidy for people to buy something completely new. Because if they sell the old stuff, especially in the property market, if you sell a new flat and buy, if you sell the old flat and buy a new flat, then probably what you sold will be able to contain about 60 or 70% of the money used for purchasing a new one. So the government's the subsidy given will be much less compared with just encouraging people to buy the new property. So that means with the same amount of financial resources put into this program, it can be like 3 or 4 times larger impact than just encouraging people to buy the new property. So that's why we see this program has been coming up, not only in the property market, but also like in home appliances, cars, all these kind of things.
So Warwick here, now here it's a tough question probably for all the governments around the world, basically, manage the expectation, people, okay, there's a real demand to upgrade their living standard, to move into a new quality flat. But at the same time, people's expectation about the price, about the trend of the property market, you have to manage them. For Shao Yu, probably this is the time for you to do the investment. But then the decision is really up to the investors, the consumers. How can you help them to make the decision? This is the right time, rather than waiting for, say, 1 year later or 2 years later here. This is a tough job, right, for the government?
Yeah, it's always a tough job balancing the interests of buyers, renters, and owners. For those who already own property, a never-ending rising valuation is always at least a good feeling, if not an opportunity for further leverage. For those wishing to enter into the property market, never-ending rising prices is a barrier. So maintaining a balance between these different groups within society and different age brackets really is quite an important challenge. I think one of the interesting things that we're starting to witness too across China is that younger people are starting to look for opportunities outside of the traditional Tier 1 cities. And the opportunities to have a nice house, a big house, in a Tier 2 city at an affordable rate with some good employment, and particularly in and around places like Hangzhou, which have a very dynamic economy, particularly in industries suited for many of the younger, well-educated people. I think these are going to, open up some new patterns of urbanization in China that will be, reflective of a changing structure of the economy as well. Remember what the old pattern was like. With the people moving to particularly the big industrial and rapidly manufacturing industrialization areas on the East Coast over the last 20-odd years. I think we're likely to start to see new patterns of urbanization forming in some of the Tier 2 cities.
Yeah, the new transformation in the Tier 2, Tier 3 cities could be. David, the party Central Political Bureau held a meeting, at the end of April, talking about the measures, to be taken to basically reduce its inventories in terms of how the property market and also optimize improvement in real estate market. Tell us what's, based on information available now, what is the long-term trend in terms of policy making from the central government and also from the local government there?
I think one thing that the central government is getting right post this after COVID economic crisis that China has been facing much deeper, slower recovery than expected, it's going to push the government to look at things which it may not have had to have looked at if things had improved more swiftly. So the sense of equity, the sense of trying to do what it can to mitigate imbalances in the economy, I think they've come across some pretty interesting ideas. We deal a lot in horticultural areas, agricultural areas, so we're constantly in remote parts of China. And there I noticed that the poverty alleviation programs, the investment is still continuing. Now, it's not going to make everyone happy about GDP growth, but it's pretty sensible policy. And one thing which I only know anecdotally, I've not seen firsthand, but there are areas of China that overbuilt radically. And state-owned companies are being encouraged to acquire those properties at discounts and basically make them available as affordable housing. Now, this is something that's not going to have a big impact on the middle class and many people who watch dialogue internationally because they're selling to China. But for the society itself, it's an immensely positive trend. So it's taking a problem and turning it into the kind of virtue that's certainly missing in most Western countries. So I think that we're going to see some pretty interesting outcomes in cities where people can afford to live because of this mechanism through state-owned companies, which they would not otherwise have been able to. So I think there's some positives too that are flowing from the central policy.
From central policy, but also, David, you mentioned about confidence. If you look at the overall economy, export in particular, high-tech growth, the renewable energy and technologies, for example, in these sectors, they are very strong, the economy. But of course, the property market has been sluggish for the past couple of years, and the government is trying to recover this sector. As you said, the government is moving away from this from property sector as the drivers of economic growth, and then focusing on the high-tech sector. How challenging it is, and what do you make of the current efforts or progress we have been made?
It's a very challenging thing to reset an economy. Governments can only do so much. In the end, companies choose to invest, and they look where demand lies, and you can't orchestrate that. That's a natural thing that flows from market forces. The thing about Chinese governments is that they have the luxury, the benefit of time. And I think they look at this transition and they will do what they did in a number of core things over the 90s and the first decade of the century, which is taking a gradualist approach. Don't just shock a sector with change, but work towards something that has a balance, a measure to it that people can adjust to. And I think with the property sector, they're going to try and maintain as much stability as possible while these other areas become stronger. So I think we'll see some gradualism in this process. And we will have stopped talking about the property sector long before the problems will have been solved and focused on other things. I don't expect any dramatic shifts. So I think it's a prudent approach, very prudent.
It's a gradual approach. So Jiahe, you agree it's a gradual approach? And of course, at the same time, while we are trying to recover this property market, there are challenges, inherent challenges you need to overcome. For example, in terms of population, right? This is a low birth rate. In terms of a marriage rate, which is also low. Things like the fertility rate. So there are some real challenges. That's not only for the property market, but also for the entire economy. It's a process of overcoming those challenges and also make the transformation toward the high-tech sector.
Yeah, definitely. As you mentioned, the population issue, the low marriage, low birth rate, it will be helped by a lower and more affordable housing price. And that's one of the many important reasons that why we try to reduce the property price. Because when the property price is just way too expensive, and people say, okay, I can't afford a large house, and I got one kid, and that's enough, it's too noisy, so I won't have many more kids. I actually read the research. It did a lot of service to thousands of people in metropolises and asked those, do you want a second child or a third child? And there is a possibility that the larger the flat the person is owning, the more possible that he or she will want to have a second or third child. That's a very direct correlation between how large your house is and how many children you'll be having. So that's one of the many important reasons. And I think it's a very important reason why we want a lower price, a much more affordable price compared with our salary, our rent. Because that brings up the birth rate again. Another thing is that if you look at the Chinese economy, we are still growing. We're growing at about 5% per year. And if you look at our monetary base, that's growing at about 7% per year, because that's GDP plus inflation. So inflation is about 1 to 2%, and GDP growth is about 5 to 6%. So we have the monetary base to grow at 6, 7, or 8% every year. So if the housing price remains flat here, for the next 5 or 10 years, then in fact, compared with the salary that people are making, compared with the saving and the money people are having, this housing price will actually be lower for 50%, even if it stays the same 10 years later, because people earn like 100% more and they get more money. And the housing price will be much more affordable in that case. And if the housing price can be maintained flat or with a small amount of declining for the next 5 to 10 years, then the housing price will no more be a problem for this country. So that's why we're taking this, as you said, gradual approach to deal with the issue, because the time will cure the issue of high property price, because China is still growing.
On that note, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thank you for being with us. See you next time.